This is a Film Stories original podcast.
We made it.
Welcome everyone to the Xcast. The truth is in here. I'm your host, Tony Black, and welcome back to I Want to Believe Minute, where we unpick the second X-Files movie 1 minute at a time. Today, helping me to explore minute 4, running from approximately 3 minutes as Monica Bannon grabs a weapon, through to 3 minutes 59 seconds as Father Joe and Agent Whitney dig through the ice, and the whole Xcast team, Carl Sweeney, Sarah Blair, and Kurt North. Welcome back, guys.
Hello again.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Good to be here.
Yeah, very good. And I think it's my turn, isn't it, for talking about the movie?
It is, yeah.
How I first say. Why don't you one of you ask me?
Okay.
The question.
So I think you asked Kurt if he had any mates back in 2008. So Tony, did you have any friends? Any friends in general, or any friends into the X-Files? I suppose is what we're asking.
No friends. No. I sort of. Yes, I sort of did actually. At the time,
were they suffering from Stockholm syndrome, or
so they were just captive audience? Yeah, one of whom being Matt Latham, who has been on the podcast before, and many of us know. And I didn't go and see it with him, but I went to see it with a mutual friend of ours who I used to hang out with a lot, and also an old friend from school actually, who I again was hanging out with, and also a girl who was sort of going out with my old friend from school, but who I kind of ended up with at the end of the night. But that's a different story, because the night continued on. Yeah, I know, thanks. They both gave me a look there, as if to say, well played, sir. But yeah, we went as a group, and she was from the south at that point. We lived in the Midlands, and she was also a fan of the X-Files. So we all went out as a group, and we saw it in Birmingham at the cinema. And I was looking forward to it because, like everybody else, I assumed this was going to be a really good film. I assumed this was Mulder and Scully back. I'd seen some of the trailers, as we talked about in a few episodes ago. And I was excited. And I have to say, I came out of the cinema really disappointed, as did one of my friends who was much more into the X-Files than the other one was, even though he'd watched it as well. And we both came out of it just going, that wasn't very good. It just wasn't very good. And I think it was that feeling that it maybe, and I've thought about this a lot since, because my opinion, like you guys, has changed on it, and I feel better towards it now. But I think maybe I just wanted something that they didn't give me, really. I do think, and I know I went into it knowing it wasn't going to be a mythology film, which I think everybody deep down kind of wanted in many ways. They wanted to see a bit of a wrap-up of some of that. So, and I was fine with the idea of a standalone movie, but it just felt very, very low-key and underwhelming at the time, and didn't have the scope or the dramatic power, and I had issues with the continuity of it. I mean, that was something that really stuck out to me right from the very beginning. Of they are having to completely ignore the ending of The Truth, where the entire weight of an alien super soldier civilization is hunting Mulder down, and they basically have to just go, "Oh yeah, don't worry about that." They almost literally say that in the dialogue. Yeah, don't worry about that. It's fine. So that bit I really struggled with, because continuity does mean a lot to me in the storytelling I enjoy. And it felt like they were just having to skim it. So I was a bit disappointed. It didn't really do a lot for me at the time. However, and I think I went years then without watching it, to be honest. Not out of any determined thing, but I think in the years between this and then the revival, it's not that I stopped watching the X-Files. I just didn't really go and watch it, if you see what I mean. It was before they were always on the streaming services, and it was easy just to drop one on. And, I was out a lot. I was at uni, I was partying, I was doing a job, etc. Blah, 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 blah. All this stuff. man in his late 20s or whatever. And so it kind of, I just didn't watch it. So then I think it would have been in the lead up to the revival, I think I watched it again, and I've since watched it a few times since. And it definitely has got better with age. And I think it's the Star Trek, the motion picture effect, It's the older you get, the better it looks, really, and the better it seems. And I think there's a little bit of that with I Want to Believe, in that it does look great. I mean, we've talked about a lot of this already. It does look really good. It's very evocative. It has some really interesting ideas. I think Duchovny and Anderson are pretty good. But I still feel like it's not even close to being the kind of exciting standalone horror monster movie, etc. we might have got, or they could have done. It feels like a very, very television story. Not even a 2-part television episode. You could have done this in one, I think, really, in the main. Or maybe 2 different ones. You could have done Father Joe as one episode, and Visions from God and all that, and then you could have had, Dakshin and Thomashin and all the, Frankenstein stuff as another. But I think, as a whole, it's I think I would never give it above 7 out of 10, like a lot of you guys. I think that's as far as I would go, and it doesn't come close for me to being as fun or entertaining as Fight the Future, even though they're very, very different films, in fairness, but better than it was.
So what would you have been in 2008? You think you'd have been like a 3 out of 10 or something? Or?
I think maybe a 4, 4 or 5, probably a 4. Yeah. So I think it's a similar story for all of us, isn't it? It's got better. Here's a question: has it improved because of, or in spite of, the revival show series?
Well, I think it occupies a different place now, doesn't it? Because at the time, 2008, like you mentioned in a previous episode, it comes out the week after The Dark Knight. I don't think it was going to be a hit movie anyway. I think there might have been better times to drop it in the calendar in 2008. But I think, maybe the weekend after the Batman movie's not ideal, but there were other movies out. It came out the same weekend as Step Brothers, which made a lot more money than the X-Files, and Mamma Mia was out at the same time, and I just don't think it was going to be a big hit at that time. And then it doesn't do that.
It should have been released kind of October-ish, shouldn't it, really? October, November time. That's kind of... Yeah. Because it feels like an independent movie.
Maybe. I just don't think it would have... I don't think that would have made as big a difference as some people sometimes suggest. But anyway, my point is that, okay, so it comes out, it doesn't set the world on fire. There was a time then where it looked like, even though there were like intimations that they might want to do a third film for 2012 and all that, it just seemed to be unlikely, didn't it? And it did seem like there was a time when this could have been the end of the X-Files in a way, before we get to the revival. So then the revival comes, and I Want to Believe is no longer the ending anymore, and therefore that takes some of the weight off it, I think. It makes it easier to appreciate what's good about this picture. And it might be a similar story one day with things like Season 11 if there's some other kind of continuation, etc. So yeah, I think that's what's changed. I think it's because the revival has come along to take some of the burden off it in a way,
Well, what I did find fascinating was when I was watching The Truth to record that, is that Disney Plus instantly put me into My Struggle 1. And I started to watch it. And when Scully came on and she was in Our Lady of Sorrows, it felt like, we're in a different era here. Oh, I need to watch I Want to Believe. And that's the reason why I went back to I Want to Believe. And it does feel very kind of, now feels like it's a different era of Mulder and Scully because of the separation, that they're not in the FBI, that, she is living her life as a surgeon, that kind of thing. And it does, for me now, land in a slightly different place because of that. And I don't think that would have been the same with just the end of I Want to Believe, because you just think, it's just a movie because they've left the FBI and that's it. This, now because of My Struggle, feels like it's actually lived in a bit more.
Yeah, I can get that. So let's talk about this minute then. And obviously we're continuing with the sequence as it has been, but we've got some. I think there's an interesting intercut here between scenes like Monica being attacked by the character. I think it's Thomashin that is the one of the two. Correct me on that if I've got that wrong, but I think his name's Thomashin. And the stabbing of the ice, I thought that was interesting, that they contrast the two. So there's, again, a bit more of that horror imagery going on, isn't there?
Yeah, I think so. And because they've been cross-cutting back and forth, through these opening minutes, and then the moments you're referring to, it gets really frenzied, doesn't it? And the rhythm of the editing really intensifies, and it's kind of evocative of the fact that there's this attack scene going on. It reminds me in a little sort of way, I'm not comparing this in quality necessarily, but like the shower scene in Psycho, the way that the editing in that scene mimics the motion of the knife. There's something to the way this is really frenzied that's a little bit like that. And I think the editing here, it puts across the violence in a way, because this is a film that had to get a PG-13 rating in the US. It couldn't be like uber violent. But I think the way a scene like this is put together, you kind of feel like it's more violent than it actually is. You don't see as much as you think you do, if that makes sense.
Isn't it kind of like what they said, Kurt, you might remember this, about the editing of Home, where you don't actually see the actual hit.
Where they have to,
there's no impact.
Frame by frame it,
Correct. But then I think it's a really effective way of doing that here, as they're stabbing the ice, but you associate it in your mind with her getting attacked.
Yeah, because it's the second stab that she does when she goes to throw the fork at him.
Yeah,
and then you see the ice pick going into the ice, and it's like that's you're mentally visualizing that. So I think it's always a good technique.
It is.
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, the guy who plays Thomasin the Attacker, his name's Fagin Woodcock, and we don't get a good look at him here. He's sort of flat, but he he gave me vibes of. Do you remember Revelations?
Yeah, I was just thinking about him.
Yeah.
Homer Simpson's evil twin.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't remember the guy's... Michael Berryman, is it, I think, the name? Because he's the guy from The Hills Have Eyes, isn't he? Obviously, very distinctive-looking chap. And similar with this guy. Yeah, similar vibes.
Yeah. I think that... I think Kurt was mentioning there that, there've been some visual kind of rhymes in this sequence of cutting between the daytime and the nighttime. And Kurt mentioned one of them there, but there's also another one, isn't there, when she's taken down in this minute by the second attacker, the second man, and that cross cuts to Father Joe like falling to the ground, doesn't it? So all that stuff gives it a bit of don't know what the word is. It works well on a visual level, doesn't it?
There's a bit of symmetry, isn't there, I suppose, to that. And it feels intentional. It's intentionally edited and put together and stylized to connect the two things, because that feels like it's what he's been trying to do through this whole thing, isn't it? Can give us those associations between what's happening with Monica and on the ice,
and
before we get to the point that we get to in the next minute.
And it's relevant to what the film's doing as a whole, isn't it? Because it's like there's a message that the priest, the Father Joe gives that's relevant to what Scully's going through in the other storyline, and there's like a link between the stem cell research in both storylines. And I think there are various points through the movie where it's suggesting that kind of synergy between things that might at first look kind of disparate,
Even on this one, and it's just like you said, Carl, a couple of minutes ago, in the previous days, that there's things that because you analyze it so tightly in this style that you pick things up. Like, so you'd think that, Father Joe's going out to the ice and he falls down because you see the fact that, Monica's captured and she falls to the ground, but it's actually the arm, and it's because of Father Joe's connection to him, not to her. And you wouldn't actually think about that in the grand scheme of things about the arm, because you would forget about it by the time Father Joe confesses to actually realizing it's one of the boys, in the hospital scene much later on. So it's really interesting that actually there is that kind of thought to it. And I wouldn't have picked that up in the 4 or 5 watches that I've done in the last 5 or 6 years. So it's just interesting seeing it from that perspective.
Digging in allows you to pick these things up, doesn't it? Absolutely. But, tension is generally building in this scene, isn't it? You've got, tension on the ice as the FBI are following Joe. I think it's Whitney who's saying, let him go, let him do his thing. They know enough about him to know that he's onto something, as he's going, it's here, all that kind of stuff. I think the music by Mark Snow is really good. I know we've talked about this previously a little bit, but I really like the way he's ramping everything up here with the score. It really does feel like there's a lot going on with his music. It helps the scene a lot, I think.
Comes with a real sense of urgency. I think you also have things like the handheld camera work when Monica's running outside that gives it that immediacy to, and a bit of unsteadiness, which fits the situation, definitely. Speaking of digging in, the only other thing I really noticed in this minute is, Dakota Whitney joins Father Joe as he's digging in the ground, doesn't she? And it kind of suggests that she's quite invested in whatever is going on, whatever his contribution to this may be. She digs quite avidly with him, and I think takes it over later when he kind of sits back, doesn't he? And she carries on, So nice little character beat for her, I suppose. I don't know.
Yeah, that is it. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, that is good. A couple of things from the commentary that was discussed. When the extras are walking through, they had to then go back and digitally remove a lot of the footprints. When you see the wide shots, because they'd walk back and forth. So they had to. He said, I think he just said that it's very CGI heavy already, and it's because of that kind of thing, which is quite fun. And that's part of the reason they shot the wide shots first, and then they did close-ups later, because then they didn't have to necessarily digitize out some of the, all that kind of thing. And you wouldn't be able to see the big movie crew that were behind them as they were on the ice and all of the logistics, which is interesting. Is there anything else from this minute then, before we move on, that you guys wanted to mention?
They do have a fascination, I know only because it's recent bias, but of arms that the Cadet Hayes in Release was doing exactly the same thing. It's exactly the same arm. Sort of like, okay, there seems to be a bit of a continuity in like 4 episodes out of it. So yeah, other than that, no, nothing else. Just I do like
4 episodes in 6 years. How many years?
It's fine. It's fine, Kurt. They're armless. It's fine.
Hey, that was an A.
That was an A. No, good point. Well, okay, well, we've got one more in this block to go. Sarah, you're not going to be with us for the last minute of this block, though.
Yeah, I'm going swimming, so...
What could possibly go wrong?
Hopefully I'll see you later. I don't know.
Just look out. What's the weather doing outside?
No snow here yet.
No snow, it's all right. Yeah. But so thanks, Sarah, for joining us for this. And it'll be great to come back for the last few minutes with you, and you'll be back as a host with lots of other awesome guests a bit later on. So we will see you again on I Want to Believe minute. But the rest of us will be back for the last minute in this block. So thanks for listening, guys, and until then, always remember, trust no one.